So I'm very excited to be joined today by composer Viet Cuong and the named plaintiff of the Supreme Court case that established marriage equality, Jim Obergefell. And Jim, thank you so much for coming on. We're really excited about the release of Viet's piece, John and Jim. And we're hoping, a lot of people in the music community kind of learn about this piece, perform it, and kind of take in this information from our conversation today. So, kind of before jumping into the piece itself and Viet's writing and everything that went into it, I'm wondering if you could just share with the music community, kind of in your own words, a little bit about your story about how you went from living a so-called quiet Midwestern life in Cincinnati to essentially becoming a civil rights icon of sorts.
Happy to, and I'm thrilled to be here. Anything for Viet to talk about this beautiful piece of music. I never had any dreams, any thought of suing the state of Ohio, let alone going to the Supreme Court. But it's weird what can happen when things just fall into place. So my late husband John and I, we'd been together almost 21 years, and on June 26, 2013, the Supreme Court struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, and that was the law that defined marriage as only between one man and one woman. Now, at the time, John was dying of ALS. He was in at-home hospice care, bedridden with very, very little physical ability left. And we had talked marriage early on, back in the mid 90s, but we wanted marriage and everything it meant, not just a symbolic ceremony. So that day when the Windsor decision was released and DOMA was struck down, I realized here's our chance to get married and to have at least the federal government recognize us, see us. So I spontaneously proposed to John, and he said yes. We lived in Ohio, which was one of the many states with its own state level Defense of Marriage Act, so we couldn't get married in Ohio. We had to go to another state and figure out how to take John, a dying man, to another state just to get married. So we settled on Maryland because it was the one state that did not require both of us to appear in person for a marriage license, which meant I could get it while John was safe and comfortable at home. And then, through the generosity of family and friends, we chartered a medical jet and we flew to Baltimore Washington International Airport on July 11th, 2013. And inside that medical jet, we got to take each other's hands and say what we had wanted to say for so long: I thee wed. And it was magical. It was really the happiest moment of our life together. And we flew home back to Cincinnati. We had no plans to do anything else. But then, because of a story that was written about us in our local newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, a local civil rights attorney, Al Gerhardstein, reached out through mutual friends and said, I would like to meet with you guys. We knew of Al, but we didn't know him. And we said, okay, sure, come on over. So 5 days after we got married, he came to our home and he pulled out a sheet of paper, which was a blank Ohio death certificate. And he said, do you guys understand that when John dies, because of Ohio's state level Defense of Marriage Act, his last record as a person will be wrong. His last record as an Ohioan will be inaccurate. Because Ohio here, where it says marital status at time of death, Ohio will ignore your lawful Maryland marriage and say John was unmarried. And because of that, they will also ignore and leave blank this field where it says surviving spouse name. And it broke our hearts, but I think more importantly, made us angry. And when Al asked us if we wanted to do something about it, John and I very quickly came to agreement, yes. So 8 days after we got married, we filed suit in federal district court. 11 days after we got married, I was in court for the hearing on the case. We won in federal district court. And then as the case continued, John passed away, then Ohio appealed. We were consolidated with another case from Ohio and cases from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Michigan. And we went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, who ruled against us. And that set up the appeal to the Supreme Court. And we all know how that turned out, the way it should have from the start.
Well, it's an incredible story, and I know it's touched a lot of people, and it's definitely improved society for the better. I mean, there's been, I know, a book about it, movie rights, and now that takes us to this piece that Viet wrote. And I guess I want to ask you, Jim, when you first heard that Viet was going to write this piece, kind of about your marriage and about your story, what were your initial reactions, and what did you kind of expect the piece to sound like?
I was thrilled because the director of the Queen City Freedom Band in Cincinnati reached out to say, that organization plus the Columbus Pride Band had commissioned Viet, and they wanted to do a piece of music in our honor. And that's not something you expect to hear. And it really was just joyful news. And I immediately said, well, yes, of course. And as far as what it was going to sound like, I really didn't know what to expect because in that email, the director also said, and just let us know some of the music that you and John really liked. So I kept adding random pieces of music or groups to my list and sent that off. And then I had the absolute joy of hearing the finished product and amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, I mean, that's a great review. Viet's obviously an incredible writer. Viet, for you, when you accepted the commission to write this piece, how did it feel to take on the responsibility of composing music kind of around someone else's story? And maybe what was your biggest challenge in doing so?
It felt like a tremendous responsibility, just because it's telling their story, but kind of their story in the context of something much bigger. Uh, and so I felt a lot of pressure to write something really meaningful, but at the end of the day, I just like wanted to write a piece about love, and because love is universal, and I had gotten married to my husband last year, in the months prior to writing the piece, and so it just felt really special, and it felt like a big responsibility, but one that I felt ready for.
I think it turned out great. And I guess my next kind of question for you, Viet, is in the program notes, you talk a lot about how you zeroed in on the use of Pachelbel's canon for this piece, and you have some deep connection to it from your youth. Could you talk a little bit about how you work the piece in, why you chose that, and kind of how you feel, the Pachelbel's canon kind of weaves itself into the overall structure of the piece?
Yeah, and so the Pachelbel canon was a piece I really loved as a kid, and when I first was getting into composing, I would experiment with the Pachelbel canon. I would play the left-hand bass line that just repeats on, and I would improvise melodies with my right hand above it. And I, as a kid, I thought it was like the most beautiful piece of music in the world. And also, when I was a kid, that's when just like reality TV had become really popular, and I saw that Pachelbel's canon was used in a ton of these like television shows with about weddings, and there were always straight couples, and so that was also the time in my life where I started to kind of feel like, oh gosh, I think I might be gay, and it was just like, oh well, seeing this piece of music that I thought was really beautiful, kind of symbolized something that I, according to the law, could never have, was sad to me. Um, and when I was like setting out to write this piece, I didn't know right away that I wanted to reference Pachelbel. At first, I was thinking to myself, I want to write like a piece that almost feels like a love song, but a piece for wind ensemble. But a lot of love songs use the chord progression, the first four chords from the Pachelbel canon. And so it started to kind of find its way there. And then there was this like moment where it was just like, oh, I can like reclaim this piece that is thought of for so many as wedding music and kind of rewrite it to be um, like a refreshed version of itself, in the way that the Supreme Court decision was like a refresh for what marriage could be for people.
And Jim, for you, I know you're an officiant, right? You officiate weddings, and I know in another interview you said how you feel like in a way you've been part of thousands of weddings. What has your experience been with Pachelbel's canon, and do you kind of agree with Viet with his suggestion that this piece can maybe be a reclaiming of that melody kind of for everyone?
I love that. I love that Viet had that realization that he used this piece of music that is so much of our cultural idea of marriage. And I love that it's now part of this song honoring John and me and the win of marriage equality for queer couples. Yes, I've officiated almost 30 weddings. There hasn't been a single one that used Pachelbel's canon, but to be fair, all of the weddings I've done have been not the traditional kind of wedding. A lot of queer couples don't want to do everything like straight couples have done over time. They want to make it their own. And I've also officiated for straight couples, but not once has there been Pachelbel canon. And I don't know if that's been a conscious decision by these couples or if it's just the way it has worked out. But I love that now when I hear Pachelbel's canon or I watch a movie and there's a wedding scene and they're playing that song, I know that that song now includes us thanks to Viet's incredible creativity and talent. So I love it. He really has reclaimed it for us.
And
Mm.
yet, once you kind of zeroed in on that as kind of the main elements of your compositional process, then how did you go about like thinking about the voicing, the instrumentation, the textures? Were there any other like specific choices you made that you felt maybe spoke clearly to the story of John and Jim?
Yeah, I'll say like I kind of used Paco Bell's canon as source material, but then as I worked with it more and more, it started to like kind of uh evolve into something else. Like there's the bass line that's used in it, and then but then the piece also has this other phrase or this other melody that kind of is a foil to it, and it alternates between the two. And in the Pachelbel's canon, there are two melodies that are very iconic um, and memorable, but in the canon itself, they're never performed together. And then when I tried to put them on top of each other, it didn't work. The counterpoint was off. They just didn't sound good together. And so through the process of writing the piece, I kind of like disassembled those melodies and took them apart and essentially rewrote them so that they could work together. And so now it's like not really. It's like it has like the perfume of Pachelbel, but it's like not quite the same. Like I play this for some people, and they don't really hear the reference as clearly as I think that I hear it, which is really interesting. But yeah, and in addition to the melodic kind of changes, there's also like this texture I think I've become known for that's very echoey. It sounds like melodies or notes are put through delay pedals, so every note echoes like 4 times. And that was kind of a fun thing to do with all of this material. Because I think in a lot of ways, like the echoing sounds are symbolic of um, the legacy that people leave behind, and especially the legacy that John and Jim have left behind for all of us.
And Jim, when you finally got to hear the piece, how did your expectations compare with hearing it live? What kind of maybe emotions came flooding back to you? And what do you think John would have thought of the performance?
Oh, I mean, I really didn't know what to expect. I certainly wasn't expecting to sob like I did. That's really what I think of when I first heard this performed by the Pride Bands Alliance. Being in a theater surrounded by more than 300 musicians, queer and allied musicians, including a lot of the brass players immediately behind me. It just was such an overwhelming, immersive experience. And it was incredible to be there and to experience it and to feel the emotions. And for me, I think back to this piece and the times I've heard it, and I shared this with Viet when I saw him last. There are a couple spots in his piece where I really feel John, and the first couple of times I felt that, but I couldn't explain why. But I realized when we were out in Oregon during that performance why I think of John. And there's a section towards the beginning, but then at the end, and Viet can explain more what instruments are being used. But to me, that was when I would feel John the most and think about John the most. And I realized it's because, in my opinion, it's the musical embodiment of champagne bubbles. And John loved champagne. That was a big part of our life. So for me, I went through all of these emotions, just missing John, joy, thinking about John and celebrating joy in the context of champagne bubbles. And every time I hear it, I cry. Every time I hear it, I feel like I'm surrounded by John, and that is such a gift for me.
It's really touching to hear for sure. Yeah, do you want to expound a little bit on those two sections that Jim's talking about? And also, if you want to talk about the use of those antiphonal brass that Jim mentioned as well, that might be helpful to kind of talk about the textures.
Sure. Yeah. So the I think the instruments that Jim is talking about are just like what I call a kind of a sparkle machine in the piece. It's like a bunch of mallet percussion, including vibraphones, marimbas, glockenspiel, piano, and it creates this like really shimmery sort of sound that um, sounds very effervescent, and it has this sort of sparkling, bubbling sound to it. And it ends the piece. And it's funny, but I struggled with how to end the piece because there's this big E flat major chord, it, like builds up, and then the chord drops out, and then we're left with just the sparkle machine. It's sort of like um, lasting memories or something. It kind of becomes much more intimate at the very end. And all of the melodic material in the piece first is introduced in that way as well when it first comes in. So yeah, and I had no idea that champagne was something that John enjoys so much and that you enjoyed together with him. And so just one of those things where it just was sort of like all the stars aligned. And in another way, like it was really powerful. I mean, I'll never forget at the premiere of the piece with the combined Pride bands. It was 300 uh, musicians, and all identified as queer or allies, and they were too big to fit on a single stage. And so we had a lot of the musicians scattered around the auditorium, so it was like antiphonal brass. And there's this moment in the piece where the trumpets come in with like one of the deconstructed and reconstructed Pachelbel melodies, and then the next phrase, the horns come in and join them on the other melody that I rewrote to work with the first melody. And just to be like surrounded by all of that sound, it was incredible. And I mean, I'm like looking to my right and Jim is crying, and then I look to my left and my husband, who I had just gotten married to like that year, was sitting next to me, and we were just like kind of taking it all in. And it was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had with my music, really. And also just it felt like we were all like in a big hug together. It was like a sort of like a big musical like embrace. It was really powerful.
That's perfect, Viet. And I also, having been to these three performances now, watching musicians playing while they're crying, that's incredibly moving.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. I guess, Viet, for you, I know a lot of your writing is programmatic, whether, something like Moth or has been kind of personal to you, maybe like with Vital Signs or Deciduous. I guess my question is like in writing this piece, like how has this project changed or maybe deepened your approach to storytelling through music, which you've always been really talented at, but this is a different level, I feel like.
Yeah, I think a piece like this kind of expanded my horizons in a lot of ways, because my more personal programmatic pieces like that you mentioned, Vital Signs and Deciduous, were very much just about like my own uh experiences in my life. Um and through this piece with John and Jim, it's like personal to me because I am gay and I am married, and that's thanks to Jim and John. And so I feel like with this piece it's like kind of taking my own personal experiences and finding a way to have that relate musically to other people's experiences, and especially to you know John and Jim, with the title of the piece. Trying to tell my story, but at the end of the day, it's just my story is just one of many, many, many people's that this piece is about.
And kind of like
And
on the idea of, this piece is serving many, many people. Jim, when I was kind of preparing for this conversation, I was watching a lot of your content, and in one interview you talked about how previous to this you kind of considered yourself a checkbook activist. That was kind of your
Mhm.
self-used term, where you identified something, you were able to support it economically, and then you kind of just hoped it would improve, right? Obviously, this situation has changed you, as far as your advocacy. And when you think about a piece like this and all the people in the arts that can maybe bring their skills, their talent, their leadership, their influence, how would you say that this experience has maybe changed or made you rethink how arts can serve as an advocacy tool to support, what is right?
The arts are so incredibly powerful, whether it's music, theater, they bring us together and we share an experience. We can learn from that experience, and it's a way to build community. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about the arts. And this piece of music, I think back to when I saw this performance in Cincinnati in a completely full Episcopal Cathedral in downtown Cincinnati, and there were queer people there, there were straight people there, the band members, their loved ones, people from the church, and we all became a community during that program. And this piece touches people's hearts because they understand the inspiration, and then they get to hear this piece of music that just brings forth such wonderful emotions. So the arts can play such a big part in advocacy, in building community, in changing hearts and minds. And we should never forget just how powerful that can be. That's a space where we go along on a journey together, and it does change us. Much like my journey going to the Supreme Court changed me. I wasn't an activist, but when you get involved with something that impacts other people and makes life better, it changed me profoundly, and I have to keep fighting. And I love that we have this piece of music that can be part of that, a way to connect with people in a way that I hadn't been connecting before, or in a way that our story hadn't connected with others before. And especially when it's performed by a queer group or queer and ally group, even more important because it's all of our story and we get to share that musically and touch hearts and minds. I've certainly experienced it firsthand.
And kind of on that idea of like sharing your story, kind of the nice thing about attending a concert is, when the piece of music is being performed, we're really just there kind of with our own internal thoughts, kind of taking in the performance, listening to the music, and kind of just dialoguing with ourselves. So for both of you, and maybe Viet, you could go first. What is maybe one thing that you would want audience members to know or think of or be aware of while they're getting the opportunity to listen to this piece kind of in the coming months or years?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things would love for the audience member to take away, but I think the most important thing is just um, how much like love and community can bring people together, and how love is such a universal thing where you can relate to people you wouldn't think you can relate to because of love and because of hearing their stories. Um, like we recently had a performance of the piece in Oregon at Oregon State, and that was the first time the piece had been performed by a uh, non-Pride band. So it was a piece, or a performance where the piece was just presented at a concert with other pieces, and there wasn't like a sort of, um, you know, a like a queer theme around the concert or anything, and the group was just like the university wind ensemble at Oregon State, and the audience was just there to hear the concert, and it was so powerful to have Jim introduce the piece and tell the story. And I think a lot of people don't know the story. And for them to hear that and to hear this music that kind of like abstractly touches on the story of John and Jim and of the fight for marriage equality, it I think made a lot of people think, and it also educated a lot of people. And I think that's my main hope for this piece, is that it just tells this really beautiful love story and introduces it to a lot of people uh, who don't know it.
And Jim, what about you for audience members? What's maybe a couple of things they could take away from this piece or be thinking about?
I hope that audience members read the program notes, to understand Viet's thought process and why the canon came to mind and why it was important to him and why he felt excluded from that as a kid. So I hope when audiences have the chance to hear this that they pay attention to those program notes and understand that this is just one example of how the queer community was excluded from many things throughout history. And here's this beautiful piece of music that is celebrating that and taking what for hundreds of years was something that was for the straight community, and it's now the basis of and an inspiration for and the creative spark for a piece that's about our community and about love. As Viet said, this song is all about love. And I hope that, when they get to the sparkle machine part at the end, that they leave feeling that joy, because even though this is a story of love and loss, it's overall a story of love. And the fact that the sparkle machine brings forth John, in my mind, strongest in the piece, I hope they leave feeling just a bit of joy because of the sparkle machine, but also with that understanding that this was a piece of music, Pachelbel's canon, that wasn't part of our world. We were denied it, and now it is because of the brilliance of Viet.
It's very kind of you to say. And it is a great closer. I think it would be a wonderful way to end a concert. I guess, kind of in closing, again, question for you both is the arts have kind of always been like a haven to, members of the LGBTQ community. A lot of queer people are associated with the arts, and the performers are going to be working on the piece a lot more in the months leading up to the performance than just the attendees of the concert. So maybe for a young person in particular who feels seen as a result of working on this piece, like what's something you would want them to know for both of you?
For me, band was exactly what you're saying, Sean. It was like the one place in school I felt like I belonged and where I not just belonged but thrived and could like be myself in a way where even if my friends when I was a kid didn't know I was gay, band gave me a place where I felt like it would be okay one day to tell them. And uh, I hope that this piece can make anyone who is in the group who maybe feels excluded or like they don't belong, that there is a broader world out there where they do belong. And I know if I had played a piece like this when I was a kid, it would have meant a lot to me. I don't know if I would have ever told anyone at the time it did, but uh, I would feel really included in a way where I didn't when I was a teenager.
Jim?
Much the same for me as a choral singer throughout high school, college, and still with the symphony chorus. Music is so important to me because I can lose myself in it, but I can also find myself in it. And I think that's one of the great strengths and the power of this piece. People can find themselves in it. And it's also about love. It's about marriage. It's about love and loss that brought about marriage equality. So what I hope, if there's a kid playing this piece who is worried about their future, unsure of what their future can be, I hope this piece gives them some hope, knowing that whether or not they choose in the future to get married, they know that they have the ability, the possibility of falling in love with someone and saying, I do. And that's what this piece celebrates. So I hope this piece brings them some joy and some hope. And just, I hope they feel that connection, that they're seen because of this piece, that the emotion that they might feel at times, the emotion our community feels, was captured and is shared brilliantly for audiences everywhere. So, hope and joy. I hope that's what they get from this piece.
Yeah, I think they absolutely will. And you've been such a joy to talk with, Jim, and Via, it's always a joy to reconnect with you. I know you're really busy. It's Pride Month. That's the 10-year anniversary of marriage equality. Surely you have a lot going on. Your cat's busy in the background there. So thank you again, Jim, for coming on and Viet. And we really look forward to releasing this piece and kind of sharing this additional content with everyone around the release.
I can't wait. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm gonna have to deal with my cat now.
All good. Okay, thank you,
You.
Jim.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.